Hi everyone, Sean here, and welcome to another episode of Lines in Sand. Today I want to talk about something that I came across when reading through the king lists and various other slightly contradictory versions of the lists of pharaohs. There are many anomalies and bits of information that do not quite line up in these lists of rulers, but one thing that stood out to me was the very enigmatic Baka, also pronounced in ancient Greek as Bakaris. Now, the reason that this particular person stood out to me is because he was supposedly the eldest son of Djedefre, the eldest son of Khufu, who supposedly built the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is a common misconception that the three pyramids at Giza were built one after the other. This is of course true, at least chronologically, but not if you are following who was pharaoh. Khafre, another son of Khufu, and the supposed builder of the second pyramid at Giza, did not directly follow Khufu to the throne. Now the reason I mention this is because it was supposedly Khufu's oldest son, Djedefre, who took the mantle of pharaoh first before Khafre after the passing of their father. But Djedefre did not, it seems, build a giant pyramid at Giza, so he is easier to forget when we get wrapped up in what we see before us. This is also a complication in the various unified ground plan theories that pop up about the Giza Plateau, but that's another story for another time. So where does Baka, or Bakaris, come into this? Well, this is the thing. Nobody really knows, and that's what has really sparked my interest here. Baka was the son of Djedefre, so some Egyptologists argue that Baka took over as pharaoh after his father, Djedefre. Others instead believe that Baka became pharaoh after the reign of Khafre came to an end. But why would this be the case when Khafre's own son, Menkaure, was a perfect candidate to inherit the throne? Of course, thousands of years later, it is Menkaure's pyramid that still stands proudly next to his father's and his grandfather's. But where then is Baka buried? Did he take after his father Djedefre and plan his funerary complex away from Giza? Or did he even really exist at all? Confusing this even further is that one of the supposed burial sites that may have belonged to Baka has also been attributed to Nebka or Nebkare, and yet another pharaoh called Khaba from further back in the 3rd dynasty. Some sources, particularly around this individual burial site, which we will get to in a short while, conflate these three supposed pharaohs. Nebka and Khaba were pharaohs who ruled towards the end of the 3rd dynasty, whereas Baka, or Bakaris, assuming those names refer to the same person if they even actually existed, refers to a supposed prince of the 4th dynasty. Let's then try to cut through the mud a little bit. Ascertain clearly, or maybe a little clearer, the periods in which Baka may have ruled, if at all, and then examine, more importantly, some of the evidence given to where he may have been put to rest. I will preface the main bulk of this video's script by saying that there is no clear, definitive answer to this question, much like that of the speculation around the final resting place of the architect Imhotep. But my intention here is to, hopefully, at least clarify some avenues of investigation for future videos, some threads that can be pulled on further down the line. Oh, and if it's not entirely clear yet, for the purposes of this particular video, I will be operating under the assumption that the pyramids are tombs belonging to various pharaohs. So just a heads up there, I know that rubs some people up the wrong way. So without further ado, let's begin. Quite famously, Pharaoh Khufu's son and immediate successor, Pharaoh Djedefre, did not choose to follow in his father's footsteps and construct his tomb on the Giza Plateau. Instead, he or his advisors chose a site at Abu Rawash, approximately 5 miles north of Giza. The lost or ruined pyramid of Djedefre is no more than a pile of rubble today, but sources online liken it to have matched a similar size to that of Menkaure's pyramid at Giza. There are also conflicting ideas of how long Djedefre reigned as pharaoh. The most popular accounts are between 8 and 11 years, and it was originally thought that Djedefre's now lost pyramid was not finished in that timeline. Whether it was finished or not, in the pyramid timeline, the next pyramid to be built was the gigantic pyramid of Khafre, back at Giza, right next door to Khufu's enormous Great Pyramid. Or was it? Are we jumping ahead of ourselves? This is where the enigmatic reign of Baka, or Bakaris, potentially comes into play. Touted as Djedefre's oldest son, if the Prince Bakaris, or Baka, did become a pharaoh, then surely he would have constructed, or at least attempted to have constructed, his own tomb, pyramid or otherwise, you would think, in the height of the 4th dynasty, from which we see the biggest and most impressive pyramid construction projects, that this pharaoh would also leave some sort of mark behind. He has, however, by all accounts, slipped through the cracks of time. But before we look at the potential candidates for the burial place of Pharaoh Baka or Bakaris, let's take a very quick look at what we do know about this enigmatic figure from history. Ancient Egypt Online lists Menkaure as Djedefre's half-brother. Other sources, most sources to be fair, seem to indicate that Menkaure was the son of Khafre, which would make Djedefre Menkaure's uncle. This should be taken with a pinch of salt, however, because only a paragraph or two later, the same Ancient Egypt Online article correctly refers to Menkaure as Djedefre's nephew. Like I said, this stuff can get pretty confusing very quickly, and most of that is due to conflicting sources of information rather than the complexity of the timeline itself. It is the base, unverifiable nature of the timeline, coupled with different sources confidently stating different versions of the timeline as fact, that makes studying the chronology of the pharaohs, if that's the right way to put it, so difficult. And it also goes a way to explain, I guess, how a pharaoh like Baka, on whom very little is known, can fall through the cracks of time, as it were. The truth is, we know literally next to nothing about Baka's reign, and as I said in the introduction to the video, some even debate whether he reigned at all, or whether he even existed at all. He is easily conflated with several other pharaohs. This leads us nicely to the first of several possible burial places for this perhaps forgotten pharaoh. This first site is responsible for clouding the skies around Baka and Bakaris further, as no proper impressions were ever made of the cartouche that was found there. Instead, hand-drawn recreations were taken, which look perfectly fine at first glance, but this has resulted in multiple different interpretations when it comes to translation. I won't go into the specific translations here, but this cartouche is part of the reason why Baka is conflated with Khaba, or Khaba, or Nebka, or Nebka. It was found at the so-called unfinished pyramid of Zawyet el-Aryan. This is a very mysterious site indeed, and one that has been covered already by other excellent channels and videos on this platform, which I will link to in the description below if you are interested. Calling this an unfinished pyramid is a bit of a stretch, because all that remains is a T-shaped excavation into the bedrock, the bottom of which was filled with a confusing pavement of limestone and granite. Initially, all of this was buried under an unimaginable amount of stone that had been thrown into the pit, but when it was cleared, at its bottom was found one of the strangest and most peculiar shaped containers that has ever been found in Egypt. I say container rather than sarcophagus because there's absolutely nothing about this little vat with its enormous lid that resembles a sarcophagus, other than the fact that it's a hole with a lid that fits over the top of it. Keith Hamilton, whose excellent layman's guide on the subject is one of the only easily sourceable works on the matter of Zawyet el-Aryan. He challenges the assumed title of Unfinished Pyramid, instead attributing the excavation with the title The Great Pit. Whatever its true purpose, modern Egyptology has been quite dismissive of this excavation, and whilst incredibly damaging work was undertaken to investigate its purpose at the beginning of the 20th century, outside of appearing in a Hollywood movie in the 1950s, the unfinished pyramid of Zawyet el-Aryan has more or less been left to the ravages of time, and is now lost inside a no-go zone, out of bounds right in the heart of an Egyptian military complex. Further investigation at this site, for now, seems incredibly unlikely. Thankfully, due to Mr. Hamilton's paper and the works of Mariolio and Rinaldi a century before, who we've also talked about before in regards to their work at the Great Pyramid of Giza, we do have some threads to go on. Mariolio and Rinaldi created some sketches of what chambers at the site may have looked like if the pit at Zawyet el-Aryan was indeed an unfinished pyramid. They used the floor plan of granite and limestone to indicate where the chambers could theoretically have been. The biggest flaw with this particular recreation, as Keith Hamilton rightly points out, is that it imitates the interior chambers of a 5th dynasty pyramid, specifically the pyramid of Pharaoh Unas. The cartouche supposedly seen at the site, however, by Egyptologist Alessandro Basanti, whether attributed to Baka, Khaba, Nebka or Nebka, well, these are all 3rd or 4th dynasty pharaohs. There are no 5th dynasty pharaohs on record that have names similar to those that I have just listed, and Unas himself supposedly came at the very end of the 5th dynasty, several hundred years later. So the timeline, as wishy-washy as it can be anyway, doesn't quite add up here. Personally, I think there's more going on at the pit of Zawyet el-Aryan than it being the foundation for an abandoned pyramid. But there are one or two things that nag at me, however flimsy they may be, that do tie it tenuously to having some sort of funerary function. The first, of course, is the previously mentioned cartouche. The second is the argument that the pit at Zawyet el-Aryan was in the early stages of construction and was completely abandoned. This is hardly hard evidence, but it does fit with the narrative that Baka was a pharaoh that has become lost to time, to the point where people even question if he even existed, let alone ruled at all. Perhaps a drastically shortened reign of 1 or 2 years explains why Zawyet el-Aryan is a, quote, unfinished pyramid, abandoned and forgotten, just like the pharaoh who commissioned it. Other potential burial sites, however, only come into play due to the conflation of Baka with the early 3rd dynasty pharaohs Khaba and also with another 3rd dynasty king Nebka, sometimes referred to as Nebka. Even without this direct conflation at some places online, Khaba is attributed to another structure at Zawyet el-Aryan, often referred to as the layer pyramid, and the so-called unfinished pyramid or great pit of Zawyet el-Aryan, which we have just discussed at length, has also been suggested as the burial place of Nebka, not just Baka. You can begin to see why it is perhaps easy to mix these pharaohs up, even if they are from different dynasties. But let's take a quick look at the other structures at Zawyet el-Aryan, seeing that we have just looked at the unfinished pyramid. The so-called layer pyramid, seen here in a diagram form from Mark Lehner's Pyramids, is a ruined pyramid that initially has a fairly simple subterranean structure. There is an entrance stairway and also a vertical shaft, both of which lead to a burial chamber deeper within the structure. If this was the total excavated space, then it would be a fairly simple structure, but connected via a tunnel at the opposite end to the burial chamber is a series of magazine chambers that extend past the perimeter of the pyramid. There are 32 magazines in total, and it makes for a puzzling yet also rather organized subterranean layout. Ancient Architects has an excellent video focusing entirely on the layer pyramid of Zawyet el-Aryan, which I will link to in the description below. Now, there has never been any evidence found of a burial inside the layer pyramid. Its attribution to Khaba is made by the inscription of his cartouche found on pottery in a nearby Mastaba. Now, near the layer pyramid is Mastaba Z500. It is located around 200 meters north of the layer pyramid, and its use has been debated by Egyptologists, which we will get into. Some have suggested that this mud brick structure was a funerary temple. Others have suggested that it could have been used as a burial place, perhaps even for the pharaoh Khaba. In Aidan Dodson's paper on the layer pyramid, which I will put in the video description, he confirms that the pottery found there links the Mastaba to Khaba, and very interestingly, he states the following. Mark Lehner's recent reconstruction of the basic layout of the immediate surroundings of the layer pyramid is of the greatest value in clarifying a number of issues. In particular, it is now clear that Mastaba Z500 is indeed a tomb and not some kind of chapel associated with the pyramid. This leaves the nature and existence of a mortuary temple and other subsidiary buildings as an enigma, and no certain traces are recorded by any of the excavators. Now, it's interesting how Dodson has come to this very certain conclusion. I tracked down the reference used here by Dodson in this quote, and it points to a 1996 publication entitled Studies in Honour of William Kelly Simpson, in which Mark Lehner contributed the paper titled Z500 and the Layer Pyramid of Zawyet el-Aryan. This study, published in 2 volumes, is split up in various parts across the internet, which is a bit of a pain, but thankfully I was able to find a copy on the Internet Archive Library. As time goes on, I find that the Internet Archive saves the day on more and more occasions. Truly, it is an asset that I recommend everybody use. Anyway, there's a bit of smoke blowing going on in the text here, but Lehner quickly cuts to the facts, providing us with a brief history of excavations at the Layer Pyramid, as well as detailed maps of the area. He states that there is a quote-unquote general agreement that the Layer Pyramid was left unfinished. He proposes that the structure was potentially never used for royal burial, which could indeed be true due to the lack of evidence for one ever taking place. Interestingly, Lehner also quotes Jean-Philippe Lauer's work. Are you ready for this? Histoire monumentale des pyramides d'Egypte, in which the author suggests that work stopped prematurely on the Layer Pyramid due to not only the death of the pharaoh, but the, quote, total loss of his body. End quote. Parallels again can be drawn here between Khaba and Baka with this set of circumstances. Again, I am not attempting to force a connection or even a conflation, but it is interesting to see a pattern nonetheless. On Mastaba Z500, however, which is the reason we cut away to Lehner's paper here in the first place, he clarifies that the structure was originally thought to be a mortuary temple due to its orientation and the findings of stone vessels at the site. This was later revised when further work studying the Mastaba was unearthed. You can see in the quick sketch on screen from the diary of Egyptologist Clarence Fisher, dated March 1911, that the Mastaba is split into 2 chambers, each with an access or burial shaft. Furthermore, there are additional sketches of the interior of Mastaba Z500, which is more in line with what we would expect for a burial chamber. Uncoupling this with the large amount of Khaba-related artifacts found at the site, the burial chamber theory for Mastaba Z500 has now seemingly overtaken the mortuary temple theory. I'm still not as completely and utterly certain as Aidan Dodson is on the matter, but I'm not the Egyptologist here. It's also worth noting that in his 1911 diary, Clarence Fisher writes, "There is no main chamber, no coffin or trace of burial remained." More recently, in 2015, the Egypt Exploration Society reported the discovery of another mastaba that could be attributed to Khaba. The initial excavation of the mastaba, located at Quesna, apologies if I'm pronouncing the name of that location incorrectly, I've never actually come across that before, even further to the north than Zawyet el-Aryan, took place in 2010. However, it was the discovery of a seal bearing the name of Pharaoh Khaba in 2014 that linked the structure to that particular pharaoh. Now, before we wrap up, however, we have to quickly address Abu Rawash. Both the pharaoh names of Baka and Nebka point to Abu Rawash. The latter, Nebka, due to Nabil Swalim and Aidan Dodson, who both provided accounts on Mastaba Z500, attribute an Abu Rawash-based Mastaba, which does not have a number, to be belonging to Nebka. Regarding the former, as in Baka, Alan B. Lloyd, in his commentaries on the writings of Herodotus, reminds us that the Djedefre broke the tradition of erecting burial monuments at Giza and instead did so at Abu Rawash. Using this, it is suggested that the Djedefre's son, Baka, could have done the same. But is there a link between Baka's possible resting place at Abu Rawash and the excavation at Abu Rawash attributed later on to the pharaoh Nebka? Are they one and the same? I don't think so, but my leads come to a halt here. The only info I could find around the potential tomb at Abu Rawash for Nebka was a reference to Aidan Dodson's 1998 paper entitled On the Threshold of Glory, the Third Dynasty. I was able to find a record of this on the University of Bristol website listed under Dodson's research outputs, but unfortunately there doesn't seem to be a way for me to download or even view the paper online. I'm instead shepherded to the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology website, which sends me around in a loop. Bristol is not too far away from me, but it seems for now that I cannot access this document. It may be worth investigating this avenue in the future if I have a further need to do so. But for now, this lead is probably tenuous at best, and I think this video has been as long and as confusing as it needs to be. So, as always, I will close by asking you, what do you make of this, of any of this? Do you have any particular opinions on the various sites, such as the pit at Zawyet el-Aryan, or the Layer Pyramid, or the sites at Abu Rawash? In particular, the Great Pit at Zawyet el-Aryan. If it was not a pyramid or a tomb, then what could it have been? Did Pharaoh Baka really exist? Or am I just wasting everyone's time here? A victim of the conflicting king lists. I would like to thank you very much if you are still watching and listening at this point. Lines in Sand has now been online for just over a year, so I would like to take this opportunity as well to say thank you all for your ongoing support and viewership. And as always, if you are new here, please consider liking the video if you enjoyed it, or subscribing to the channel if you would like to see more content on ancient Egypt in this vein. I will see you in the comment section, and if not, I'll catch you again in the next video. But for now, all the best and take care.